indeed. So I'd like to invite Antonella Baldini from the Cassa Depositi e Prestiti. She's in charge of international development. And they've, over the past few years, the bylaws have changed of the CDP to enable it to have a more specific say in what's going on. It has been issuing green bonds. They've already been developing significant and sustainable projects. Thank you very much. Antonella?
Grazie.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Yes, you're right. If one's wondering what Cassa Depositi e Prestiti does, I'll be explaining how and why we are so interested in sustainability. So thanks to Confindustria, thanks to San Patrignano for hosting us today. Really expressing its role in society and also expressing how it supports individual and collective development. So finance, sustainable finance is obvious. It's here, it's growing. It may be struggling somewhat, but there are very strong links between finance and sustainability, because you've got finance as the driver of sustainability and finance drawing guidelines from sustainability and indications and recommendations from sustainability, and the financial sector that can, in fact, reconcile short-term rationales with mid to long-term rationales. And this is nothing new, because that's what finance does. It links together the short with the medium and long term. But what's changing, what's new in the approach in sustainable finance is the focus on a long-term view, a multi-generational view. And I think this is the necessary starting point for talking about sustainability. Now, one thing that hasn't yet been mentioned this morning, but that I think is relevant, is that over the next 15 years, something like $24 trillion in wealth will be inherited by the millennials, our young millennials who have a propensity to invest in funds with environmental and social objectives, which is more than twice what previous generations have invested this century. So I think that's an important fact, because it's certainly not the only driver of financial markets, but certainly it's something that financial markets are paying attention to. In fact, financial markets adapt to the growing needs for sustainability of populations and providing financial instruments that fit in with the sustainable mentality. Over the last few years, green bond issuances have grown on an average rate of 40% a year, $167 billion in value in 2018. That was their value. So similar trends can be seen in the social economy, impact investment network, etc., estimating that impact investing amounts to $228 billion in terms of assets under management. Similar growth figures can be seen in social bonds. So essentially, all these figures support the notion of sustainable development finance and an asset class that is really becoming quite significant. On the other hand, as we heard this morning, the boundary conditions are various and different around these situations. We've got the global economy as a whole, but we've also got the economy of our country and our strategy as a country. It's a strategy that you can see at the micro level, with initiatives undertaken by entrepreneurs in the financial sector who are called upon to really work out a different paradigm in strategic growth and development. And we heard about that this morning from Ronald Cohen in his keynote speech. it's no longer a strategy based on returns and risk, but on three variables: risk, return, and impact. So the approach is really three-dimensional now. We then, a step up from the micro level, we have the macro level, economic policy choices that must be consistent with Agenda 2030, with the Paris Climate Agreement, and the prospects for global growth. Against a background of certain megatrends, some of which were mentioned this morning, and that are essential for supporting growth and development of the global economy, but also of the Italian economy. For example, struggle against climate change. We're talking about innovation, digitization. We're talking about the key role of developing countries, where we're seeing a whole new map of poverty and development, the roles of China, Brazil, for example, today versus 20 years ago. And we're also thinking about other megatrends like social and demographic developments and changes that in just a few years' time will completely change the global balance. So the Cassa Depositi e Prestiti comes to the rescue when there are problems, and it's a cliche. But it in fact is quite true. There is a close link between politics, policies, and what Cassa Depositi e Prestiti has done and still does. So our current commitment, based on our recent business plan, is to operate differently with regards to achieving sustainable goals. And this is an effort that our entire group is tackling, and it's a role that we play by allocating private resources, for example, postal savings that are used for, as it always has done, for interests of general economic and financial initiatives, as we are long-term investors. Now, it's as long-term investors that we must use capital over the long term, but we must also be able to strategically consider longer-term horizons, focusing on the long-term impacts of the actions that we undertake. So we need to be consistent with the SDGs. We need to pay attention to sustainability. It's one of the main pillars supporting the CDP's activities, and it ties our history very well with our future prospects and the innovative challenges that we are and will be dealing with. But just let me dwell for a moment on a couple of innovative aspects regarding our strategy. That is, bond issuances that were mentioned previously to support sustainable growth, and our role as a financier for international cooperation. So, going on to green, social and sustainable bonds, for the last year and a half, the Cassa Depositi has rolled out bonds, green, social and sustainable bonds, and they've enabled us to interact with socially responsible investors in much larger numbers than before, and they've also shown the contribution that we wish to make towards developing these financial markets, these green and sustainable financial markets. Hence, not just a focus on the initiatives that are funded, but also on the development of a financial market and of financial tools that tie in with the goals of sustainability. So Cassa Depositi today has placed 3 bonds, the first in November 2017. That was the first social content bond issuance, and then there was it was the first one issued by an Italian issuer. And our bonds were also issued to pay for post-national catastrophe rebuilding, and another important sustainability was launched recently with a view to supporting high environmental impact and social impact projects. And in March 2019, just a few weeks ago, another social bond was put out that will be used, the proceeds of which will be used to support energy refits in cities and etc. So there is a very strong focus, on the one hand, towards raising money to invest sustainably, but there's also the aim of fueling sustainable finance in our country as well. There's another innovative aspect to our strategy, which is the role we play in international cooperation. There are many jobs that we have, one of which is to be a financial institution to support international cooperation. There are many other European countries, in fact all the main European countries, had an institution such as this and have had for decades now, some for as long as a century, but Italy didn't. And the Cassa di Risparmio Prestiti is the most recent of this type of institution in Europe, and there's a very close link between our sustainable identity and the tasks we fulfill in terms of international cooperation and financing for development. Cassa was assigned this role not just to be able to support the financial effort, but it was also because it was consistent with who we are, our identity. Cassa needs to join the international community in order to provide the services it does, and mention has been made very often of the various initiatives undertaken in conjunction with Confindustria, and we are supporting the country and its entrepreneurs through the development of export financing and internationalization efforts as well. Again, mention was made this morning of the fact that it's just not enough to support companies in their export activities and reaching out to global markets. There are challenges that we need to tackle today that are global, and they have an impact, a huge impact on our country's economy. Therefore, for a national financial institution such as ours, it is crucial also to establish relationships between our manufacturing system, our country system as a whole, with partner countries in emerging and developing markets. So it's really a part and parcel of our strategy to seek co-development. And here we play a very precise role, a very specific role, which is typical of an institution such as ours, which is to channel additional resources from the private sector towards initiatives in developing countries. And truly, this is typical on the international stage, and the buzzwords is from billions to trillions, leading us to think about which additional resources must be made available and which new model should be put in place to attract private investments. And the Cassa has played a unique role in bringing together public and private finances, not just from postal savings, but elsewhere, with a view to looking beyond the Italian borders and beyond the confines of the OECD countries. And this is a transition that requires something quite different. The concept of billion to trillions calls us to allocate risk differently from before and to adopt a different development policy with a new balance between the private sector and the public sector, with a new balance between the rationale of the donor and the rationale of the market player. So public monies, not just made as a one-off contribution, but as a lever enabling private initiative to thrive. So the development approach that is being called for is one based upon blending, the concept of blending and mixing public and private resources. So bridging public and private initiatives between general interests and the risk appetites and interests of market players. So this, in fact, is something that Cassa Depositi e Prestiti is focusing on and believes it has a role to play in to roll out the strategies with partner countries. And it also ties in with the European Commission's strategy with the external investment plan. Cassa has actually participated in the plan. It's put forward a number of proposals that are a very good fit with who we are and what we do. There are initiatives relating to small and mid-sized companies and mid-cap companies through instruments that provide easier access to capital markets and with a very strong focus on the countries of the African diaspora and also a focus on renewable energy sources. These are the very first projects that we submitted to the European Union and have many of which have been approved already. And in our position, that's something we're very proud of as a latecomer to the game. So we have certain specific characteristics in our country as a financial institution. We are truly unique. Also, not just in Italy, but in Europe, because within our group, we bring together a number of different important functions that could together support a development policy, a new development policy and a novel development policy this century. So we have export-oriented financial instruments. We've got instruments tailored to development financing and so on. And we will be favouring an integrated approach together with local administrations and with the sources of Italian excellence. We've signed an agreement with Confindustria, with E4Impact as well, and with the San Patrignano community to actually mark this revving up of our strategy. Where in international cooperation, we see the need to have an integrated approach, a holistic approach towards development. And this is an integrated approach that will help us fulfill the demand from millennials for sustainability. And obviously this is not something that the millennials are asking for, it's something they're demanding. And we can offer today a channel, an opportunity for integration within our country to support policies for economic development and growth. It's ambitious, but it's being demanded by our future generations. And I believe that the fact that we're all here today with so many young people that are attending this meeting and who are on a journey that they're determined to complete and of which they are demanding tangible results. Well, this is, I think, in fact, an invitation for all of us to work together in an integrated way to achieve concrete results. Thank you.